Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashrothi, and that wasn't supposed to be visible right away. Sweet, that was the mistake for the day. All right, I am Ashrothi. This is the Eve Universe Show, continued coverage of CSM 16 with our interviews of the candidates. That is also the wrong name. Gosh darn it, I'm actually going to do it again because that's too big of a mistake. I got all the I apologize, guys. I got to let you know. There are some really awesome new streamers recently in the last 2 days. So there's a video that's late, and this wasn't ready nearly as much as I should because I was helping out a new bro try to get his Astero into 1DQ. I felt like that was a noble effort. He had a lot of fun, but it meant that I wasn't quite as ready for this interview as I'd like it to be. So let me just correct this real quick, and then we'll give him his fair shot. Because this isn't Richmond. That's the most important part of this. And oh, come on, of course. Let's move the text out. And where is it? Text, come on, move out. There we go. Sausage being made live. This is what you guys come here for, right? I know it. The YouTube audience, none of this even happened. They don't get this stuff. Oh, shoot. Certainly don't get that stuff. Only you live viewers. All right. We ready? You ready, Zero?
Born ready.
All right. Let's try this again. Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashrothi, and this is the Eve Universe Show, continued coverage of the CSM 16 through our interviews, this time with CSM candidate Xeromus Plague. Before we begin, how you doing, Zero?
It's a lovely day. How are you, Ashrothi?
I'm doing quite well. I'm a bit frazzled. There's been a lot going on, and there's a lot of you candidates to interview. But thankfully, CCP's narrowed it down to 42. But it still gives me a lot to do. So let's just jump straight into it by explaining the rules. I have 50 minutes to go over his campaign post, which I will show in the center, and ask him any questions about his positions or whatnot to really dig into him as a candidate and try to understand where he stands and get the best impression for all of you, my viewers. And then after I am done, I will give it over to him for 10 minutes. So that way he can wrap it up with anything that I may have missed or whatever. After that's done, that entire interview will be brought over to YouTube and released in part of the CSM interview playlist that is on my YouTube and published around places. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. Xeromus Plague, I actually, sorry, my bad. One last thing. Also, at the very beginning, I like to disclose any sort of previous knowledge about a person that I have outside of just their campaign posts. And in this case, it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody because if you've been paying attention to my show, I believe you were on a week or two ago. I can't even remember. Weeks are blurring by at this point, but maybe 2 Fridays ago, you were on as a representative as part of a larger Poshfin discussion. But I didn't get a chance to really dig in with things as a CSM candidate. I assume that we probably worked alongside each other during the Triglavian efforts, and we've probably even spoken a few times, although I will confess that my ability to attach names to people means that I don't have any like previous to us just talking on our during the last show. So that's what I know about you. So let's just jump into it. You represent a group called the ITC, and this is something that we didn't, or you don't represent, but you're part of a group called the ITC, right?
It's fair to say I represent them. We're kind of a decentralized group, and we don't have a leader, but we have a couple of representatives, and I'm one of them.
Got it. And so that's actually a good question. Do you have like the backing of the group? Are you the official ITC candidate for CSM?
Yes.
Okay,
I was actually motivated to run by not only my alliance, but by a lot of folk in Kybernauts who wanted to see one of the independent factions run a candidate.
excellent. Okay, great. So, but like people have heard of the Kybernaut Corp, people have heard of Strybog, but probably the ITC is a little bit less well known. So, given the fact that this is the group that you've gravitated towards and you are, apparently prominent within, what is the ITC and why do you resonate with it?
Interstellar Triglavian Collective used to be ITF. We were a public community for running Triglavian content in the early phases of Invasion, back when there was no ability to side with the Trigs. You could just fight them. So ITF was a group that we tried to mimic incursion communities, and we came together to explore and run that content. And ultimately, we stuck together as an alliance. Just we were the stragglers and the misfits of Pochven, the outsiders, the small gangs, the folks that didn't want to be folded into Strybog. And while we're larger than Kybernauts, I'd say we're a little bit less organized than them. We're definitely a group of casuals.
That's fair. Yeah. So yeah, Kybernauts definitely has like very specific objectives, and their leader Opus Magnus, has some pretty good leadership skills, and so probably would be organizing them towards a set goal. But you're more about just kind of providing the tools to allow all of the people, all of your group to live in Poshfin and utilize it effectively, rather than like everybody working towards one concrete goal, like a hive mind.
You've said it perfectly. Our main goal was to make this space accessible to people. We felt like if you didn't participate in Invasion, there wasn't a lot of reason to come to Pochven. So our number one goal since Pochven has been to make this space accessible to new players.
And I believe, now that you've mentioned it, I do believe I encountered your group when we were running Invasions a few times. And if I remember correctly, your group was one of the group that were actually pretty well behaved. So, well, I mean, you know what I mean? Like some of them, like especially like the incursion dudes. Like I remember Warp to Me incursions once started like we showed up at the same invasion site, and so they started like contesting things like you would in invasion or incursions, and we're just like, dude, what are you even doing? And then they like started acting, like bumping us, like actually trying to
Oh
disrupt things.
God.
I was like, oh hell no, you don't understand, man. Like I'm doing this for a stream. You just made your content like your content. Our content now is messing with you for the rest of the day. So then we almost went to war, and then they realized how silly that was, and so then they didn't go anywhere. But so there were definitely bad behavior during that time. But if I remember correctly, you were one of the groups that like if you were in it with another group running invasions, like you coordinated with them and made sure that everybody was able to get things done, and that clearly went through into chapter 3. Is that correct?
Yeah, man. I mean, we came into this thinking this emergent content has led to the spontaneous creation of a community, and we want to keep it together as best we can. We tried not to get involved in the politics, the tit for tat, and the little spats between people. We're just like, we love all the Trig community. We want to keep them together, and we want to see this place grow.
Right. So, okay. So then Poshvin gets formed. You guys move in. You've been there for a little while. Uh, I guess so. I'm assuming that that's one of your main positions, right? Like, or that is that your are you you're not a one are you a one candidate or one topic candidate, or do you represent Poshvin? How deep into the Kybernauts is your CSM representation versus like more of a broader representation?
A little of both. I have to say I'm deeply rooted in Pakvan. This is, super important to me. I feel like this was a great lesson in how CCP can do something perfect, like get everybody on board and make like a really cool piece of content. So I'm really into Pakvan. I consider myself a Pakvan candidate, but I hope to have appeal outside of this because to a greater extent, I'm just about to have my third birthday in this game. I'm almost 3 years old in Eve, and I represent a newer demographic of players. I'm not a bitter vet. I'm not somebody who's got all these years and years and years of experience. I represent a group that's come to the game in more recent years and perhaps represent that perspective. So
Excellent. Okay, great. Yeah, and there are actually a few good candidates that are bringing that up, and it is absolutely true, especially with these times of great change. The newer players often have honestly a better beat on things than older players, because older players learned an older system and then don't bother to relearn the new system. So I find that players with 3 years of experience end up being actually more knowledgeable of things outside of like older content, of the newer stuff, far more knowledgeable of the mechanics than even more experienced players for that reason. things like even as simple as using the agency effectively. So I think that it is very true that candidates that are within 2 to 3 years of experience, they have a different view of Eve, and I think it's an important one to have on the CSM.
Absolutely. And I think I also have a different view of Pochven to some extent. I mean, the main Triglavian candidate, Maldavius, I love him. He's a good guy. We work together a lot in Pochven, but he has a lot different pain points than I do. He comes from the perspective of someone who leads a very large organization, a very well organized organization, and he doesn't face the same pressures as someone who, consistently fields between 5 and 10 pilots on a good day. So we had a very different experience living in Pochven, and I kind of wanted to represent that point of view that, there's other groups out here who have a very different experience, and maybe we should try to get some representation as well.
Awesome. So to that end, let's drill in on that a little bit. This is one of the questions I really like to ask when it comes to somebody who's like, I want to represent faction warfare space, or I want to represent Pochven, or any one thing. It's like, okay, so what is the purpose and value of Pochven to EVE Online?
The question is twofold in that what it currently represents is a Silk Road. It currently represents a superhighway by which people can project force to places they otherwise might not be able to get to, and thus it is a content creation machine if used properly. But as for what it could represent in the future, I think that this could be the next phase of faction warfare. So many folk are hesitant to participate because they have to sign up with an empire and thus revoke half of their access to high sec. Whereas in the Triglavian content, you were able to fight over the sec status of stars, raising and lowering stars from high sec to low sec, but at no point did you have to sacrifice your empire standing. And I think that this is a really good direction to take this. More people would be keen to jump on board in a conflict if they didn't have to give up half their access to the game to do so.
Yeah, I agree. And there was consequences. A lot of people like to discount this, but there are, 50 some odd fortified systems and a whole bunch of Edencom minor victories. And my absolution is not alive right now because because of my standings with the Triglavians. So, it's not for nothing. But I feel like it feels more like an acceptable consequence because it's not like an entire all of Caldari Highsec or something like that. It's not Jita. It's a smattering. It makes transportation slightly more annoying depending on where you're going. And yet you also have these other advantages like Pochven. However, also they did just change Pochven pretty significantly, where Pochven actually kind of its value, its purpose almost changed pretty fundamentally a couple of weeks ago with the change to Pochven, whereas before it required 1 or 3.0 standings, which is potentially several hours of, effort work and can potentially be frustrating work because it's not guaranteed that it's like going to be easy or consistent to do before you can even get to that first threshold, let alone that second threshold, which is effectively necessary to be a functional person in Pochven. That changed. So now the gates have been completely shut off, which has done two things. One, it's made it so that grind is no longer necessary, but it means that the advantage of having done that grind is reduced. You still have some advantages. You still can, dock in the stations, build things, you go into the home systems depending on your standings. But the navigation of Pochven has been opened up, which has severely exposed the residents of Pochven. So the idea of like creating a nestled fortress for those who have become pro-Triglavians has fallen to the wayside in place of this idea of like you have the one home, but the rest of Pochven is just kind of open game. How do you feel like that? How do you feel about that change? How has that impacted Pochven? How does that impacted how you feel Pochven, I guess, should be?
So
Or
I'm a man who likes to see the silver lining of things, and on the plus side, this has brought us a lot of content. We've gotten a lot of chances to practice our PvP and things, so there's fun to be had. But I admit I'm not optimistic about this specific change, and maybe I haven't made up my mind entirely yet, but it seems to me that everybody who played during Invasion and everybody who's come to Pokven since to grind out those standings, this is a huge middle finger right in their face. Now, effectively, you've served up all of Pokven on a silver platter to any sufficiently large group that feels like moving in and taking it over. That doesn't quite sit right with me. And in my perspective, leading a small organization as I do, most of our time has been spent getting people to +3 and grinding the standings, and now you've taken away the rewards that they earned for those months of hard work and now told them, go do it. Go do double that. Go get +7 if you want to see any reward at all. It's like, dude, I don't even have +7. I've been playing this content for a year. That's brutal.
Yeah, exactly. And here's the other kicker, which is that the fortress of the home doesn't really matter because two of the three home systems don't have anywhere to dock. So it's not like you can even retreat into two of the three home systems. So, it's not
Yeah.
it's not the greatest situation, but hopefully they'll continue to iterate on this. But you said that it does bring more content into Poshfin. Um,
Yeah. No, I mean, we're at our roots a small gang organization. We used to be nomadic, we'd wander around and just look for fights and null. And now here we live in this space where people come poking around. We can hunt them. Sometimes they hunt us. And it's just the type of fights that we're equipped to take. It is a subcap small gang paradise. And that's my vision for this space. It's what makes it fun.
Yeah, and I think that so there was a period of time in which Poshfin residents basically could make a ton of ISK with the sites inside, and then obviously we had the Seagull or Taxman or whatever you want to call it situation, and that's kind of progressed to the point where those income sources are kind of not as accessible right now, and yet it also seems true that there's kind of this setup establishment that you as a Kybernaut should take on the behavior of the Triglavians, use a signal filament or something else to get out of Poshfin, go harass, attack, steal from ESSs, kill, whatever, do whatever you're going to do, and then use your Poshfin filament to get back home, just like the Triglavians would. And that kind of like you become a raiding party. Um, do you see that as being successful, or do you think that that actually might be something that CCP has intended?
Absolutely, and I wonder if I'm one of the few FCs in the Triglavian groups that still run content like that. I feel like most of the use of the yeet filaments, as we call them, has been for people to escape from fights rather than to seek them. And our organization specifically sets up 5-man extraction filaments where it just launches us somewhere random, and we're in, a kitchen sink or a suicide doctrine, and we're like, let's go see what we find. No, we don't care if we make it home alive, and that has been really fun for us. We can do that in groups of 5 or 15, and I'd like to see them expand on that some because I guess the real frustration from trying to lead that content is you really don't have a reliable way of having it put you somewhere where there's gonna be a fight like you do with the needlejack filaments. Some of the extraction filaments just put you in nowhere space.
Well, but
But yeah, I love that idea.
why not use Needlejack?
Oh, I absolutely do, but they're
Oh,
they're in significantly shorter supply. I would almost wish to see the Triglavian filaments be brought more in line with the needle jacks and that they can go to systems with high traffic or low traffic or this and that.
that's fair, but I would argue that you could use your one noise filament, go out and hack a whole bunch of cans, get more filaments, and then use your filament to get home, and now you have a bunch of signal and noise filaments, right?
You've got me there. I don't do a lot of can hacking, so maybe there's a sustainable way to do
Yeah,
that.
they come out of data sites. So if you just go to like nullsec and just hack a bunch of data sites, you'd get more of those filaments. But either way,
See, I didn't know that. For me, they
there you
just
go.
come out of drifters and Eden comms. They just come out of the cops when I shoot them.
Right. That so the Poshfin ones drop off the rats. The Needlejacks drop out of data sites.
Oh, I see.
Yep. Mm-hmm. All right. So, but that the point is that you are one of the people that's out there exploring these mechanics, looking how to do into this. You're not trying to be closed minded and try to make this round peg fit into this square hole. You're trying to look at what CCP has created and say, how do we get the most potential out of this?
Absolutely. I think it's an underutilized piece of space right now. And for a lot of us, it's just been hold on to it. It's, we don't want to lose it. The changes to the gates represent a threat to us, and survival is the name of the game. But ultimately, I mean, I see us flourishing as a raiding party, kind of like you described, like an interstellar pirate organization.
And the other thing I catch out of what you're saying is that while a lot of people talk about Poshvin, especially the people that are passionate about Poshvin, um, in regards to like it being wrong or broken in some way, and that's why they're upset and need to make why they're being loud about it. I hear somebody who is not mad at the state of Poshvin, but really loves it and wants and sees its potential and sees it as something that can be better. But you also just also like it the way it is. Would that be accurate?
So there are things about Pochven that could be improved. The same is true of everything in Eve. There's always changes we could make to improve our quality of life. But yeah, I do love Pochven. This represents to me the biggest thing that I've gotten to be a part of as a gamer in Eve. I've had some adventures. I flew with goons for a little bit, and I did my part exploring the content in Eve. But this invasion content was the first time that I saw a spontaneous evolution of a new community just out of nothingness. We formed this whole movement, a decentralized objective based team, and everything that's come since has just been incredible. I feel like I've been a part of the history of the game. When Niarja fell, that's the first time that a little guy from a little corp felt like, hey man, like I was a part of this story. I may not be a part of a big null block, and I may never see a keep star pop in some big siege, but gosh dang it, I helped take Niarja. Like
Absolutely,
that was a beautiful moment.
absolutely, and I think that that's a really big key. I think that CCP, a lot of this, CCP is clearly experimenting with the idea of like what motivates players. What will players fight for? The interesting stuff. I remember like even when Chapter 3 first began, and people were out there swarming the sites in order to do it, and it was like, but you're getting no payout, and they're like, I don't care about the payout. I remember talking to CCP, one of the CCP devs that did it. They like made the feature, and when that got said, he was like over the moon because the idea that players were fighting and dying and putting so much effort and they weren't doing it for the reward that was built into it. They were doing it because they were fighting for the system. That really showed that they hooked into something because ISK is a means to the end. And we've been saying for I've been hearing from nullsec, especially in the last couple of years, that CCP needs to build conflict drivers, and that's what this is. That's what these stargates that we're going to be building is. CCP is experimenting with what it means for CCP to be able to build a conflict driver, when most of the time players want CCP to get out of the way and let them build their own justifications. Now we're saying like CCP can build these catalysts, being able to fight over changes to the universe itself.
Yeah, man, and I've encountered a lot of bitter vets who feel really grumpy about the invasion content. They're like, Eve is a human conflict simulator, and the only conflict that should exist in this game is that which is created by players. There shouldn't be this narrative-driven CCP heavy-handed. And I understand that sentiment. If you come from a null block, that's probably the way you feel. You want to drive your own content, and that's cool. But if you're us, if you're a small gang, if you're a new bro, if you're one of these people who just doesn't have access to that big sort of content, this was the first chance you really got to like be a part of something. And I feel like CCP hit it out of the park. The Triglavians were mysterious. Engaging with that content was exciting. We had to decipher their language, figure out what they meant by their philosophy. I mean, it was just a very engaging process. It was fun outside of the game. You were thinking about the Trigs even when you weren't logged in. So even if you just want to live out in null and never engage with this sort of content, like that's fine. But understand, this brings people to the game. It makes them stay. It makes them feel like they've got skin in the game, and they're a part of Eve.
Sorry, while you were saying that, I just had to laugh because I was like, wait, who's he talking about? We? No, I'm just kidding.
No, I think you're a little larger than me. Fair, to be fair,
I'm
but
just kidding.
if
I certainly didn't do the text. The Arataka Research Consortium put a lot of work into that, but no, I was just kidding. No, you're absolutely correct. The Triglavians were a race, a faction, the fifth faction that we can side with, that was introduced over the course of 3 years. And obviously that story isn't over, but it was a very compelling way of doing it. And there were, in my opinion, I think there are some missteps. Edencom obviously were pretty upset with the result, and it seems that CCP apologized to Edencom, but Edencom was like, being part of the invasions didn't mean anything for those who were in Edencom. There's no reward. And so CCP was like, you're right, that's not really fair that the Kybernauts got a reward and you didn't. So they just took away the reward from Kybernauts. But I digress. Um, Overall, you're right. I think that the invasions itself represented a profoundly new way of playing EVE Online. And I think that CCP agrees with that. And so having CSM members that feel that way, I think will be useful to CCP, right? Like if we just have a whole bunch of, no offense to any of the people any of the real people running. So let's just put a straw man in the CSM position, but with a bunch of stuffy old, who's a what's it's that's main focus is on things like null ratting, like they're not going to understand what is even happening here, right? You were there, you can appreciate what this means, and therefore you can represent that voice that is really represents the newest, like the biggest push in Eve right now, but is really not being represented by very many people who are running for CSM. And I don't know of anybody who is both living in Poshvin and also as into that stuff as possible. You mentioned Maldavius, but he's much more, as you pointed out, institutional, where you're mechanical, if that makes sense, it sounds like.
Yeah, I feel like his experience in Pakven has been very different than mine. We were at war with Strybog for like the first many months. We were constantly fighting uphill against an organization that had more resources, more people. I mean, so like our time here has been very different than his. I know Strybog has been affected, as you mentioned, by these tax collectors, these crab sliders, but they really haven't done a whole lot to Breadfleet or to ITC. Like we never became so deeply reliant upon the OBS sites that they became a main portion of our content. We ran them and we still run them, but that's all. They're just a means to an end. They're a little bit of ISK in our pockets, and then we go PvP. So if people are crab sliding, we just go do something else. We have plenty of rocks to mine. We have filaments we can take. We have PvP, PvE. There's always something to do in Pakven. So, we do have a very different experience out here than a lot of those groups.
Yep. And I'm just glancing through your post while you were talking, and I know I went to your Poshvin Triglavian suggestion area. And while I'd like to remind people that like CSM don't get to like get voted in and then force CCP to do stuff, a CSM guy with a really great idea can get those great ideas gone. And so you say full range of Triglavian ships, which is, I mean, I don't think anybody. It wouldn't have been hard to divine that would be something well liked by a lot of people. But the one that you mentioned next is actually really interesting to me because the Triglavian Epic arc, and this goes back to the standings issue, because right now standings is very inconsistent and like you feel like you're aligning to the flow of Virage, as it were, but you don't, like, it's very disorganized and inconsistent and hard to understand. If there was also an Epic arc that would guide you a fair chunk of the way through the standings process and feel a little bit more structured, I think that would be really, really good.
No, big agree. I really would like to see them, elaborate more on the narrative behind Triglavian culture, behind the augmentations that they undergo to live in the abyss, and in that way, kind of guide people through the lore to engage with the content a little bit more. It's an underserved market, man. We all want to see more quests with Triglavian stuff.
Yeah, and so then your next point is actually about those seagulls, those tax collectors, and we've talked about this on several episodes. You can go check them out on the stream if you want to. In fact, I think you were on at least one of the conversations about it. But the thing I would like to add to that conversation at this point is not only is it annoying to the people that are doing it, in a way that can't be dealt with, because then basically to catch everybody up, everybody who participates in the site gets paid out. The problem is the definition of participating in the site. People can go in and hit the thing and then kind of screw off and stay kind of nearby, and that would still count. But the issue is that they're not actually even doing that. They're warping off, warping back to the outside area, which still counts as being in the site. And then even from there, burning off 4,000 kilometers and just sitting out there. So nobody can get them, no matter what, basically nobody can get them. And then they just get their payout from the site. The issue with this, in my opinion, is that, and this may sound weird, but it looks bad for Poshvin, right? Like Poshvin already has a bit of a PR issue at the moment, with people not really understanding it, hating, whatever, being grumpy about it, not liking the fact that Niar's just dead, or like taken, whatever, whatever it is. But on top of that, now groups, when people go in, they're like, oh, there's interceptors over there. And they warp in. They're like, wait, why are these interceptors at 4,000 kilometers? And then invariably somebody explains it to them and they go, oh, that's stupid. It's like the very first thing that they see is people like breaking the rules and like warping, like being totally dumb and like, oh, okay, so I'm just going to see interceptors that I'm not going to be able to go after. yay, right? Like it definitely doesn't. Like I think it's just bad for Poshvin.
Yo, you couldn't be more right, dude. And I gotta tell you, I think what they're doing is an exploit. I think it needs to be addressed. And if you want to take our side away, come fight us. Bring a fleet and actually put some flesh in the game. Risk something like we did, and actually come physically take the payout from us. That would be fun. That would be conflict. That would be great. But if we're going to be real, dude, these little guys are kind of like us. They're a little organization. They don't have the force to field a fleet that's going to fight, one of these larger Triglavian groups or one of the other groups living in. They don't have those numbers. They don't have those resources. So they found a way to produce insane amounts of ISK with very little work. And I got to give them credit, man. They're Pakvin inhabitants, just like us. They're people who took the risks to come live out here and engaged in some thoughtful and creative gameplay. I don't hate them. I think that that mechanic needs to go away, but as players, I mean, they kind of deserve kudos.
Yeah, and as I said, even in a previous episode, I wouldn't even mind having one of those like big damage clouds on the outside of it, so that way if they try to burn off far away, they just get ripped apart like the like the world arcs do.
Oh, put a
Um,
border like in the what you call them in the abyssals, so that
yeah,
if you go too far, you just explode.
yeah. Well, that again, that's the world arcs do that too. There's actually a damage cloud around the world arc, so if you get too far away, or if you're warping in, like if somebody brings in a frigate, there's a reasonable chance that they'll just explode on coming in because they're warping through the damage cloud. Either way, I digress.
Cool idea for a fix, though.
Yeah. Um, let's see. Anything else that I see here? Allow players to dock in home systems in Poshvin. I think that you're suggesting that like the absence of stations to dock in home systems is a pretty big problem.
Yeah, you actually already covered this. It's
Yeah.
funny you noticed it as well. The fact that they're kind of trying to pigeonhole us into these +7 systems, which are very difficult to get into, and then there's nothing for you to do once you get in there. There's no content, there's nowhere to dock. It's kind of silly.
Yeah. And again, one of the three is actually pretty nice. Kino's pretty cool. Like it has stations and it has, like if you can live in the home systems, there are belts there. That it is slick. It really feels like these should be the system that you fall back to. But given the fact that you can't anchor any structures, you can't, and there's no stations there. It's like, well, what, how do I live in the castle?
Right.
Do you just put up mobile depots? Yeah. So, um, I agree that is something that should be looked at. Um, allow industrialists to create targeted filaments that would prevent small fleets to travel more precisely to specific systems or areas. My concern with that would be, anything with that kind of focus can be used and exploited by dudes to make attacks and whatnot. So it'd have to be balanced.
And you know what's funny is I actually wrote that idea before the changes to the gates, before they went
Mm.
+3. And I was thinking of it being used against us because people were
Oh,
complaining that you couldn't necessarily go from our next door system to come attack us. I was like, okay, so you can't gate in here, but if you find a way in through a wormhole, maybe you should be able to create a filament that will lead you back here so that you can, bring a 15-man fleet or something to a specific spot that you wanted
oh.
to go to. But I don't know if that idea has so much relevance now that you can just go wherever the hell you want.
I mean, I really like that idea that like once you're there, you can get like a synchronization, and then
Yeah, exactly.
make the key home. I mean, yeah, there's definitely some cool gameplay there, but unfortunately, like that would definitely have to. Everybody glances over at Delegate Zero, and you can see him going. And you're like, okay, never mind. We won't do it. We won't do it. We're sorry. We're sorry. We're sorry. Like he knows how the physics works. So
And that's one great misconception about the run for CSM. One of these great criticisms I get is you're just so inexperienced. You're such a new player. You don't have the chops. And I'm like, bro, I'm not running to be a game designer. I'm running to be on a focus group for CCP. And I represent one of many demographics in this game. I represent one group of people. And I think I'm a fair representation of that. You should also have people who are deeply, intimately familiar with, game mechanics and whatever. But I don't think that prevents me from serving in the role that the CSM is meant to fulfill, which is to provide feedback on the things CCP does.
yeah. All right. So let's do a thought experiment then. Okay. So you got elected on the CSM last year. You are at the CSM summit that just happened a few months ago, and they proposed the changes to Poshvin that just happened. Right? You're on the CSM. It hasn't happened yet. But you get a chance to give them feedback. What feedback do you give them as a CSM member at that table as soon as they propose that we want to take the standings off of the gates?
The intended goal, or at least the perceived intended goal, of creating more conflict and action in Pakvan is noble and achievable without discounting and removing any effort, basically undoing all the work that everybody's been doing for a year. Like I agree that you don't want to create a condition of stagnancy in Pakvan whereby we can get comfortable and sit on our laurels and know that no one's ever going to attack us. I don't want that kind of life either. But neither do I want you to take what we've spent the last year building and hand it over to anybody who wants to take it. So I would say we can achieve this goal like through targeted filaments or through other engaging methods for people to side with Edencom and come attack us.
But here's the problem. I don't have the developer resources to make new filaments. I don't have the developer resources to modify old filaments. I don't have the developer resources to do anything. I can remove the standings from the gates, and that is something that so that way I can, if that can fix the entire problem by itself, or at least put it in its own direction, then I can get that done, and I can make sure to get it done. Whereas if it's a more complicated solution, we may not be able to get it done in time, soon, at all. It might end up on the backlog until somebody can champion it, whatever. So with that in mind, and knowing that it was a bigger problem to have Poshvin the way it was, in theory, first of all, do you accept that it was a bigger problem back in the day? Or do you think it's worse now or better now? And secondly, if you do feel it's better now, do you feel like that's a satisfactory compromise, that what came out of it, given the fact that, like, let's assume that it's a resource constraint issue why they went with such a simplistic solution, or like the solution that they did, I should say. Would you argue that is acceptable or not acceptable, CSM?
No, I don't think it was. And again, ultimately, because while I agree with the intended goal, I think the rollout and the methodology chosen was just very poor, and it is insulting to the players who are most committed to the space. I would not accept that this was a positive change. I don't think that it's solving a problem that needed solving. I think that you could address it without hacking at it with a machete like this. This unfortunately was not effective. And if we were to talk compromise, I would say you need to look at every individual who had +3 before you removed that and compensate them in some way. They need to get something for that work because now they worked for no reason.
That's a good point. So, and that is actually something that I think would be the biggest value that you would have had on the CSM, right? Because you probably wouldn't have been able to stop the change from happening, but you would have been able to be like, hey, do you know how pissed off everyone's going to be when you do that? You should probably do something to make it so that the people that had already done it by that point has some sort of way to make them feel. I don't know if a second piece of clothing is a good idea, but I don't know, man. A medal, something, because you're right. Like, if you could have helped CCP soften the corners of that change a little bit, even if you couldn't stop the freight train from happening. Because I think so. But let's turn this around then. You are now, you're looking for people to vote for you, and I'm assuming that you want more than just pro Triglavians to vote for you, because there's a lot of Edencom angst right now, and so Edencom, hopefully Edencom want to make their voice heard, or pro Edencom forces want to get their voice heard, and really ultimately pro Edencom, pro Kybernauts, it's about this kind of engaged conflict, semi-RP, PvP, PvE, conflict-driven type stuff. Really you could represent both sides, but with an attitude like that, I would be concerned that an Edencom guy is just like, well, you're just trying to keep, the trig all fortified. So now what would you say to the Edencom and outside dudes that are like, well, Poshvin's just bullshit then, and you're trying to keep it bullshit?
So those players might, if they're deeply committed to their RP, they might hate me more than is reasonable. But if you step outside the in character Gur Triglavians,
Right. No, I'm not. Let me be clear.
No,
I'm
no.
not talking about the RP side of things. I'm talking about literally the accusation of you are using the CSM to mechanically support your defenses at the expense of the other side.
That's what I'm trying to say is that no, I think that I'm actually well positioned to represent Edencom players as well, because they are the counterplay to our play. They're the peanut butter to our jelly. They're the reason that we had something to do in all those systems. It's not like we can, revolutionize faction warfare by just investing in the Triglavians. We need that other community to thrive, to have, something to rally behind and to have reason to get up in the morning, log in, and come fight with us. So I haven't forgotten about them. I'm excited when I see Edencom people from the invasion in our systems coming to fight with us. I'm like, oh snap, they're still around. Like, let's do. And I know that they feel somewhat overlooked because we have Pakven as like this thing. This is our identity now. We have to protect this. We have to rally behind it. It's like a whole community. They don't have that. They just have some systems to go mine in high sec, and they kind of fell apart after the invasion. So I'd like to see content that inspires them to reform the Edencom Defense Initiative and project some PvP fleets out into our space.
Absolutely. And I think it is very important, and I think that you, as a representative, as we pointed out, like, really your ultimate goals is the same as Edencom, because if the content is fun for both, then that means it's fun. If it's fun for only one side, then that means it's one-sided and it's not actually fun. So I wasn't necessarily suggesting that, but what I'm saying is, in this specific scenario, you have just argued, they've been complaining that they're locked out of Poshvin, that Poshvin is for the Trig and not for them. CCP wants to address the fact that Edencom doesn't really have anything. Their solution is to open up Poshvin so that way they can attack it too. You counter with, that would not be okay, and it would be better to just keep it locked down without making a change if you don't have a more sophisticated change. Now respond back to Edencom and tell them why or what you would say to make sure that they you now need to answer for their angst, because CCP came
Okay.
up with a solution. You said no to that solution. How do we deal
So
with Edencom then?
I think Edencom is first and foremost the one group outside of the Triglavians that have a right to come fuck around in Pakvan. Forgive my language. I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on your show. They're the only group outside of us that I think has any stake in this space because they were deeply committed to the content, same as us. So while I'm upset that you've opened the gates to any fucking giant null block that wants to come in and steamroll over all of us now, that doesn't mean I want to keep everyone out. If anything, I think Edencom especially should have a way to hack the gates or should have a way to come be aggressive in the space. So when I say I reject this specific change, it doesn't mean I reject your place in Pakvan. It doesn't mean I reject the role of Edencom in keeping us on our toes or in the PvP interplay between us. What I'm saying is I don't think this is good for either of us because neither of us gets to come play in Pakvan if some giant military superpower decides they just want to claim it and exploit it.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, what I'm hearing is that if that proposal was proposed, your response would be that a half measure is a bad measure, and that there are potentially some solutions that are a little bit more complicated than the solution that they went to, but the difference between a correct solution and an incorrect solution is the difference between actually servicing the people who you're trying to fix, and as opposed to just pissing off everybody. Because I don't think that Edencom felt necessarily good about these changes. I mean, there has been more content. Edencom have attacked into Poshvin, but I don't think that they were like, yes, this was the thing we were looking for either. So I don't know if they made anyone happy with these changes, even though long term we'll have to see how well they how well they play out for the overall health of Poshvin.
Yeah, honestly, I want to see more reason for us to be fighting. That's it, and I want it to be between us. I want the conflict to be between the players who are invested in the lore and in that specific story. And I don't want Pakven to just end up in the hands of some other giant group. So it's a
Yep,
tough line to walk.
absolutely. And then okay, so beyond just Poshvin stuff, Poshvin is just a manifestation in your interest in just the Eve universe in general, right? So I'm actually looking at your non-Poshvin stuff, and you have stuff about the lore, right? And uh, historically, this is one of those things where like a 3-year-old pilot will have a totally different idea than a 10-year-old pilot, right? Because a lot of older pilots grew up in a world in which they didn't read or care about the lore at all. You grew up in a world in which it was at least there was something happening, and so you grew up learning about it and digging in deeper in a way that a lot of older players may not have. And so you see the value of the lore. I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak to those older players that may dismiss, like, speak to the Goonswarm players, speak to the, the Nullseckers, speak to the people that don't understand the lore or care about the lore or haven't gotten into it yet. Why do you feel it's important for us to have a CSM candidate that understands and cares about the lore and can advocate it to CCP?
Well, I know that those players exist, and I've met a bunch of them who are just completely disinterested in story, and they're only here for game mechanics and explosions, and that's fine. And I love those guys too. But you got to understand, if you've never tangled with the lore of Eve Online, go look into it. It is deeply philosophical, political, transhumanist. Like it's an amazing story, and the Triglavian story is especially fantastic. Um, the reason this stuff is awesome is because even if you don't necessarily get engaged with the backstory of Eve, if that's not thrilling to you, it's a big seller for some people. Our whole Triglavian community is to some extent an RP community. The same is true of the Eden comms. The same is true of, a lot of people in this game. So player retention is driven by, what keeps people engaged, what makes people stay. And for a lot of us, it's the deep backstory of this game. Go watch Ashtarothi and Yinton talk about like all the different empires. Go listen to Uriel or read some of the forum posts about all the different stuff that's happened. I came to this game 3 years ago. I'm still learning about stuff that happened. I'm still learning about the drifters and the drones and things that went down before I got here. Like the story is incredible. And I think it makes people like myself who are just total nerds stick around.
Absolutely, and I will add to that because when I ran for CSM a while ago, and so this kind of came up in my campaign, and the lore was less of a big deal back then. But either way, like the CSM isn't really needed for the lore, right? Like the CSM doesn't get access to NDA'd lore information. They don't preview a plot twist for the CSM. So why would you need a CSM that cares about the lore? And the answer is, why is there no lore link on the launcher? Why is there no why did we have to remind? I mean, it was awesome that CCP Aurora got on top of the Eve Academy website. Like within like an hour of the Academy website being displayed. Uh, what's her name? Oh gosh, I'm so bad. One of the Arceus CEO, Elizabeth. She noted that the Academy website didn't have a link to the lore, and so they got it updated, but it wasn't there originally. So having a CSM member that's like, hey, why isn't this visible? Why doesn't this link to the fiction portal? Why doesn't this, advertise this stuff? Because I think that one of the problems is that the lore is incredibly rich, but so hidden from players that even the players that would be into it don't know it's there, and don't, even if they know it's there, that it technically exists, they don't know how to access it. And the issue is that Eve is a game that you learn from other players. So like the new players get learned from the previous generation, and that goes back to that institutional knowledge. They'll be taught that there is nothing to look up. There is no place to look, because if no one knows about the fiction portal, then no one's teaching anybody about the fiction portal. And so like this has caused like an ongoing problem where even the interest in the story that could be there isn't being able to be like capitalized on. The potential is being lost every day.
Yeah, I had a lot of players who they seemed, enticed by my descriptions of what we had to do during invasion and all the, the engagement with the lore itself. But none of that stuff is immediately present for you. If you're new to the game, there's not like a link that tells you, in-depth stories. But there's a couple of stories on the main Eve page, but a lot of the stuff, like you said, you learn it from other players. I get it from content creators on YouTube. There's not a lot there to get you interested in it if you're not already.
Yeah. So, by the way, I'm actually gonna. It is your 10 minutes now. Also, somebody keeps linking to me your video. If you link it to me, um, like in Discord, right at the very end, I will play it real quick to finish up your thing.
Oh, that's very thoughtful of you. I'll get you that link right now.
Unless they're trolling me, in which case, no, I'm just kidding. Uh, but yeah, you've got 10 minutes.
Oh, jeepers. I got to come up with something interesting to say for 10 minutes.
Not
Is there any
no,
specific
no, you don't. It's just like I wanted. This is your 10-minute warning, I should say. So, in case there was anything about your campaign that I missed, or is there any other points that you would like to bring up, or topics that you would like to make sure gets discussed before we wrap this up?
well, I suppose I would just hope to address the criticisms of people out there who think that a newer player or a small gang person who hasn't lived in Null or doesn't have the chops of some of these, you know, bigger, more storied candidates. They say that, you don't have a place on the CSM. I respond, I absolutely do. I think that there's a lot of players like me. I think there's a lot of people who came to the game in recent years and are just super involved in this newer content, and you want to have a voice like that in the room. You don't want the only representatives of this game to be people who have a single-minded commitment to one type of gameplay. You want to have a variety of experiences and voices in that room. So I think I provide value. I hope that people will consider, even if you already have a candidate that you're looking to support for your number one or even your number two, throw me on there. Consider putting a vote on an independent small candidate and see if maybe it's good for the health of the game.
Yep, and I will say that if you do want to do that, you want to make sure to put him as your number one spot, because what's the worst is if a lot of people put you as your number two, you can get eliminated before those votes get transferred over to people. So Xeromus in particular is one of those candidates that if you do believe in what he's saying, make sure that he is, as far to the top of your list as possible. All right. Anything else? Or should I set up your video? Here. I'm going to assume to set up his video then. All right. I just need, this is the browser thing. Let me fix this real quick.
Sorry about that. I had a little disconnect.
Oh, no problem, man. I'm just going to set up your video to show it, and then we can wrap it up from there if you want.
Sounds good to me. I hope I got all the questions. I didn't mean to drop off there, but yeah, man, I like the idea of seeing a lot of different types of candidates running out there. I have a chance to support people who are into lore, people who are into wormholes, and so, look into my campaign. Ask me some questions. I'm pretty available.
Very cool. Well, we will wrap this up with your campaign video, but also thank you for coming. I appreciate you sitting down. I do think that your campaign is very important. I look forward to watching it. I think that you would make an awesome CSM representative, and I hope that you remain an advocate and person within our community, regardless, because I think that not only would you be valuable in the CSM, but I think that you're valuable to us outside of the CSM. So
I really appreciate you, friend. And hey, one last thing. If you're watching this video, even if you can't bring yourself to vote for a Triglavian, consider hitting me up and come play in Pockven with us. Breadfleet, ITC, come be our friends.
Absolutely. All right. So we'll play this and wrap this up, but thanks for coming.
Thanks, Ashy.
Go fleet. Do space things. Be spacier. Overheat space stuff. Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. My name is Xeromus Plague, and I'm a candidate for CSM. As you can see, I'm currently playing EVE Online, which is the game that I'm running to be a representative of. Yeah.
Zero's the best. Bum 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 bum. Vote for me. Bum 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 bum. This song doesn't have copyright, so I could use it in my video. Bum 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 bum. Vote for me. I'm Xeromus Plague.
Do you enjoy exploding in space? Me too. So much, I decided to run for CSM as a Triglavian. I represent the independent small gangs of Pockven and RP nerds elsewhere. Sometimes I make memes. You might have seen me on Ashtarothi, or maybe you've never heard of me. Either way, I'm endorsed by literal time travelers like Vermin Supreme. Here's some grainy B-roll footage of me thinking about spaceships. Look at me, just thinking about spaceships. I know you probably have a candidate or two that you already plan to support, but I hope you'll consider giving one of your votes to Xeromus Plague. I love this game, and all the characters I meet in it. Well, most of them anyways. I'll do my best to represent the interests of the community and give helpful feedback to CCP that'll improve our quality of life in-game. Remember, your vote puts me one step closer to overthrowing the empires once and for all. In conclusion, I hope you'll consider voting for me, Xeromus Plague. I might not be the best candidate, but, I forgot what I was talking about.
That was pretty epic. That was pretty epic.
Thank you.
That was pretty epic. All right, well, good luck, man.
I appreciate you, friend. It was fun to talk with you.
All right, 07.
And to you.